I like it when life is fair. Take, for example, board games. I love when people follow the rules when playing board games. And so my wife has called me more than one time a rule Nazi because I just love it when people follow the rules playing the board games. And so we actually have a rule in the house that my wife and I can no longer play Monopoly together because I'm just like, it's got, anyone else with me? It's like, what fun is playing the games if you're not going to follow the rules? Yes, exactly. And then everyone else is like, who cares? It's just a game anyways. I'm like, then why play? If you've ever been downstairs in the fun zone, I've helped out down there a couple times. And it's just, they're jumping on the bouncies. These are pre-K kids. So they're throwing balls, and it's like controlled chaos, right? And at some point, the teachers say, hey, line up, right? We're going to go into the room and try and calm you down. And then there's always one kid that will try and get to the front of the line. And I'm like, hey, kid, get to the back of the line. It bugs me that he's like, that's unfair. Sometimes life isn't fair, and we're going to look at a couple BuzzFeed lists, one list of BuzzFeed where life is just sometimes not fair. How about this moment? You're sitting on the couch watching your favorite show, and you're like, it's an important part, but you also have that perfect barbecue potato chip in your hand, and you're like, I can't eat this because I won't be able to listen, or I'll bug the person sitting next to me. And you're like, okay, I'm going to switch to gummy bears or something to remedy that problem. Or how about this one where, the song starts here on the timeline, but you keep starting right there. You keep getting it wrong. You keep jumping at the wrong spot. You know who you are. Every Sunday, keep doing that. Sometimes that's, it's just not fair. Or how about this one? I wake up in the middle of the night, 3 a.m., in the dark, trying to go get a bottle so my 1-year-old will go back to sleep. That's all I want. And as I'm going to do this, I, of course, step on the little Lego that's on the ground, and my whole body feels like it's going to go into convulsions. And I'm going to fall down and die. It's like this nuclear bomb, right, has gone off. And all I wanted to do is, it's just not fair sometimes. Life sometimes is not fair. And it can feel this way, especially sometimes when God gets into the picture. Imagine that you're a construction worker, and you can do whatever you want with this, story. Maybe you're a little tall, maybe you're, you look good, you're in shape, whatever. You're a good-looking construction worker, and there's a foreman who hires you to start at 6 a.m., and he's agreed to pay you, let's say, $400. Like, sweet, that's good flow. So you show up 6 a.m., you're working hard. Now, suppose that foreman then hires someone else at noon, and they join you on the work site, and you're both working hard together, and it's going great. And then at 3 p.m., he hires another person, and that person joins the work crew. And at 4 o'clock, day's over, he calls everyone together and says, okay, I'm going to pay all of you $400. Now, imagine you're working in Palm Springs during the summer outside. We could go as far as we want with this story, but that would be unfair, right? Be like, what the heck? I've been sweating all day long. I'm trying to hold off saying words that I would normally say. Because we're in church. It would be unfair, right? Jesus tells essentially the same exact story in a parable form. And he says this, are you envious of my generosity? I paid you the $400 that I paid you. Are you envious that I'm being generous to other people? And then he finishes with this, the last will become first. There's these tensions that are inherent in the nature, the character, the heart of God that are unsettling for us, that we cannot resolve, but we need to learn to wrestle with. And we're going to be looking at one of those today. We're finishing off this series called 5 Things every Christ follower. And if you're not a Christ follower, you should also still know this. That's my caveat. We're looking at truth and grace. Truth and grace. One of these difficult tensions about who God is and what it looks like to live the life of God. My name's Jesse, one of the pastors here at Grace. So glad you joined us this morning. It's Labor Day weekend. You guys are amazing that you're here. Online campus, what's up? Wherever you are in the world, thanks for joining. And if you need a Bible, the ushers will be coming by. They'd love to hook you up with one. Some people like to have a book in their hand. It'll be up on the screens as well. If you need one, just raise your hand. If you don't have a Bible, it's our gift to you. You can keep it. Well, we're going to be opening up this morning to John chapter 1, verse 17. John 1:17. And in the pretty blue, it's page 576. Now we're in the introduction to the Gospel of John in verse 17. And John is, in this introduction, is setting up the core themes, the core concepts that you're going to be seeing, if you read it on your own, packed throughout the rest of the 21 chapters of the Gospel of John. And one of these core themes that you will see all throughout the Gospel of John is truth and grace. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Now, this morning we're going to break this down kind of piece by piece. Let's start with this. For the law was given through Moses. Now, God gave the law to Moses, through Moses, to the people of Israel. Now, we're all familiar with like the Big Ten, right? Maybe you are, maybe you're not. The 10 Commandments. But did you know that there were also over 600 other laws that God gave through Moses to the people of Israel? Now, these laws there was civil laws in these. So how to govern the people within the nation of Israel. There were religious laws, how to follow God and be holy and all that jazz. There were also social laws, how to relate with each other and how to relate with other nations. Now, the nature of the law is conditional. It's this: if you do this, if you obey such and such law, then you'll be blessed. But if you don't obey such and such law, then you'll be cursed and things are going to happen. So essentially, you had to work to be accepted by God and by the people. There was this earning component to it. And I'm trying not to rain on the law, but I want to give us proper perspective of the law. But maybe you've been to a church that's like overly legalistic, or you've seen a church that was conditional. Maybe you had to get your life right first before you came to that church. Don't come unless you first get things straight. Maybe you've been to a church where you had to say the right things, act a certain way, dress a certain way. Otherwise, don't come, or you're going to be frowned upon. You know, I think we should have like a robe wearing day. Like one Sunday, everybody's going to dress up like Jesus. It'll be like a big toga party because I don't know. That's what Jesus wore. That's like maybe those clothes are more holy. Or maybe like this: if you make a mistake, you should hide it or pretend it didn't happen. You don't want to bring it up because you're going to be paying for that. Now, I want to give us the purpose of the law. And if you're following along in your outline, you'll see that there's a handful of blanks. This is because it's important for us to know what the law is and what it isn't, because the law is grace for the people of Israel. There is a component to the law that shows us the grace of God. Number one, it communicates the standards of God. Imagine you're a police officer trying to enforce speed limits, but there's no speed limit signs anywhere in the city. Now, we would all love that, right? Who would drive so much faster? When my kids aren't in the car. That's only one. But without the law specifically being communicated, what it is, no one can know it. So it defines what God's standards are, number one. Number two is that it exposes flaws. It exposes our flaws. This is the more personal component to what the law does. Have you ever woken up in the morning, looked in the mirror, and you're like, whoa, what happened to me? I need to deal with this in some way, shape, or form. Maybe I'll go to the shower, take a shower, do something. A mirror exposes the problems, the imperfections, right? The law does the same thing. It shows us the ways that we've missed the expectations, the standards of God. Number three, what the law isn't. It was never meant to save us. God had no preconceived ideas that any of us would actually follow the law to the T. He knew that we were going to be breaking it because we just are jacked up like that. And so the reason he gave it is to drive us to him, to help us realize once we know it and break it, and then we need God to do something to help us, to save us. We need God to save us. All I have to do is think back. If I ever lose sight of God's mercy for me, sometimes, we lose sight of God And if that happens, all I have to do is remember back. I've been in some low moments in life, like jumpsuit moments, like orange jumpsuit kind of moments, like, and I've been, I don't have to think back very far. A couple days ago that, I said something stupid to my wife, right? Where I'm like, God, I blew it again. And what that is supposed to do is drive me to God, to ask God to make me right again. And so one concept to help us have proper perspective with this: parenting. My kids need to know what's acceptable and unacceptable. So hypothetically, if my son goes and pees in the water table, you know what a water table is? It's like this big where the kids play in the water. That's unacceptable, because you got to play in that thing. Peeing in the pool is a different story. It's much bigger. It's got chlorine in it. The bathtub, we're working on that still. But he needs to know what's acceptable and unacceptable. Number 2, he needs to know when he's disobeyed or when he's obeyed. And I need to communicate that to him. Luke, stop peeing in the water table. Or, you did an amazing job being patient, or sharing with your brother, or being gentle to your sister, not body slamming your 2-month-old sister. And then the third thing, in this way of the law is meant to drive us to God, is that when we parent, we're not looking for behavior management. We're not looking to control our kids' behavior so that they're just always doing the right thing. I'm trying to explain this right. It's because we want their heart to be shepherded. It's from the inside out. So if no one's watching them, they want to do what's right, shepherding their heart. But when Luke disobeys something that's very clearly specified, and I discipline him, it hurts. He does not like it. But my son knows nothing else other than to just fall into my arms. I mean, it's amazing. Time after time after time. He does it a lot. He just falls into my arms because he knows that I love him more than he could even ever imagine. And this is what the law is meant to do. It's meant to drive us because of our need to our Father in heaven, because we need him. That's the purpose of the law. Let's look. For the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Now, in the last couple of weeks, I've been studying the truth in the law. I began to get confused in it, so I want to differentiate really quickly. Number 1, the law says, if then, it's this: you have to work to receive acceptance. The truth says, this is how life really is. Did you know that following Jesus is about getting real? Did you know that there is nothing more real than God? God is the ultimate reality. I mean, we can pinch ourselves. We're real. Unless it's like, the Matrix. We're sitting in a chair. That's real. This building is real. But all of this, at some point, didn't exist. But God has always existed and will always continue to exist. We can come and go. God is the ultimate reality. And Jesus, I love this about Jesus, all things were made through Jesus. Did you know that? That the Son of God, all things were made through him. Someone taught me this years ago, and it stuck, and I really liked it, so I'm going to give it to you as a takeaway. Anyways, John chapter 1, Hebrews chapter 1, and Colossians chapter 1. Those 3 books, if you look at that first chapter, it talks about that all things were made through Christ. It is drilling home the divinity and the God nature of the Son of God. Now, I want to give us some real practical examples of that God is going to challenge us to get real and the importance of getting real. So I love studying leadership and corporate leadership and situational leadership and organizational leadership. I love reading books about this stuff. And there's a great book called Good to Great. Tim has talked about it before. And Jim Collins talks about the importance of needing to identify the brutal facts in your organization. You got to lift up the rocks of your organization and see the little squiggly things under there that you wish weren't there. But you got to identify those things, call them what they are if you're going to go from a good to great company. How about communication? There's a great book called Crucial Conversations. You know when those conversations get crucial? We want to run. He taught in this book, Crucial Conversations, secular book about really in the workplace how to handle these conversations. He gives an acronym called STATE in how to actually have this conversation. And the first part is the S. You got to start with the facts. Before you get to the T, which is tell your side of the story, and the A, which is ask their side of the story, before you get there, according to Crucial Conversations, you need to start with the facts, because until we establish what's real and what's true, we can't have a real meaningful conversation. And how about this? If you've ever been to AA, or if you know anything about the 12 steps, what's step number 1? You got to admit that we're powerless over our addictions. That I am here because I can't change the way that things are going. Now, here at this church, we believe that Jesus is more powerful than those addictions, and we're not identified by those addictions, but the principle is still the same. In order to deal, we need to step into reality that I've got problems. Now, getting the real thing can be hard, right? It can be tough sometimes, but it's essential for truth to happen. So, my son over the last couple months has began to get afraid of the dark. I remember being afraid of the dark. Like I'd have the covers all the way up to my face, and I'd be sweating in bed, but I didn't care because I wanted to pretend I wasn't there. And I wouldn't turn my back to like the room because I always wanted to see what was over there. And Jess feels me. And I wouldn't put my foot over the side of the bed because I just felt like something was going to get me, right? And so I was afraid of the dark, and my son is at that point, and so he comes into our room regularly, like really scared. And so as a good father, one night, we already put him down. I put a nightlight in his room. A few hours later, he comes to my room and he's like terrified, petrified. I mean, really afraid. Dad, there's a really scary shadow. Shadows freak him out. Really scary shadow. And so I get up and I see the shadow. And I look at the wall in his room, and it was a scary shadow. It was kind of scaring me, actually. The nightlight was projecting this shadow on the wall from like a stuffed animal. And I was like, we need to deal with that. But this is kind of what truth does. See, truth, it exposes darkness. Truth, what truth does is it exposes lies. Imagine I come up to you and I say, hey, you just won $10,000. And you really believe me. And so because of this, you go and you buy something with your credit card and you start imagining what you're going to do with that money. You're like going on vacation. And then suppose I come to you, later and I'm like, just kidding, you didn't win any money. I'm sorry. Wasn't that a good joke? And after you want to beat me up, right? You probably would reflect on the foolishness of believing a lie, right? You believe that lie. Now, take that example of believing a lie, that silly example, and multiply it times 100 for those who believe lies every day, that maybe your parents told you lies about who you are. Maybe you're dumb, you're stupid, you're fat, you're ugly, and so you believe that I can never be smart enough. I can never be lovely in anyone's eyes. I'll never be beautiful enough. Or how about the lie that if anybody really knew me, really knew the deep, maybe dark me, that I would never be embraced. I would never be accepted. The power of believing a lie and really living under that lie cannot be underestimated or minimized. It has real power over how that affects us in our day-to-day lives. And so truth, as light, is meant to expose those lies so that we can walk away from those lies. Amen? Amen. I'll never forget, I have this vivid memory in my mind of we're walking up 30th Street with Des and me and our 2-year-old Luke and our baby Bennett at the time, walking up 30th by Jack in the Box. And Luke is running ahead of us, and he just starts kind of slowly bearing right off the sidewalk to the street. And he's running, and he trips and falls right at the edge of the sidewalk, right at the street. And right as he fell, this city bus just came barreling by. And Des just screamed, and I freaked out, and it was just like such a scary moment. You see, what Des and I need to do is teach Luke what the ramifications of behavior, because he has no understanding at all, right? He has no understanding of what would happen if he actually ran into that street. But we do, and I need to help him understand what happens if he makes decisions that are wrong decisions. the next thing that truth does is it helps us understand the real if you're following along in your outline, it's in there. The truth helps us understand the real consequences for our behavior. When I got arrested 14 years ago for speed, for meth, guess what happened? I went to jail. That's just what happens, right? And if if you're thinking about doing something, maybe like cheating on your spouse, or you're going to blow up in your work environment, blow a gasket, or whatever it is, there's real consequences to those behaviors, aren't there? Jesus goes up to this woman in John chapter 4. So, a few chapters after the introduction part, and we see this lived out. And it's this great story of the woman at the well. It's one of my favorites. I got a lot of favorites. Anyway, so he goes up to this woman, and in the middle of the story, he says, hey, go call your husband. And she says, fooled you, don't have one. And Jesus is like, you're right, you don't have a husband. You've actually had 5 husbands. And the one you're living with right now is not your husband. Now, why did Jesus bring this up? This is probably a place that she's hiding. See, Jesus is essentially asking her, hey, how's it going? How's it going? Are these guys doing it for you? Because I think they're not. And to use the analogy or metaphor, or whatever it is that Jesus uses, if you come to me, I will satisfy your thirst in ways that no man can. And so Jesus is bringing up this reality in her life, not to shame her, not to condemn her, but to help open her eyes to her true need and the consequences to her behavior. This is the key concept, that sin does have consequences or ramifications. But that is entirely different than saying because of your flaws, your brokenness, that God entirely rejects you. Those are 2 completely different things. One is true and one is not. Last week we kind of defined sin as anything that hinders a vibrant relationship with God. Another way to understand the nature of sin is that it wounds us. It hurts us in our mind and in our heart, and sometimes physically, and it hurts other people. And so the beautiful thing about truth is that it shows us how to be spared from unneeded pain, from unneeded wounds. Isn't that a wonderful thing about truth? And so because of that, the truth sets us free. This is the nature. This is what truth does. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. Let's talk about grace for a little bit. Grace is a very easy concept, hard to grasp sometimes, hard to believe, but it's essentially receiving something that you did not earn. It's a free gift. Mercy is something that you did deserve, but you didn't get. Thank you, God, for your mercy. But grace is receiving something that we didn't, it's a free gift, something that we didn't earn, but we got for free. Christ's work was sufficient payment on the cross. What he did completely satisfied the Father's need for justice, for the sin of the world. So it's a free gift for us. But that free gift was a high cost for God, wasn't it? It cost God everything. And because of that, he's worthy of praise. But because of this free gift, that what Jesus did is completely sufficient, we are fully accepted by God. Did you know that? That there is no behavior you have done or will ever do that will ever change your right standing before God if you receive God's forgiveness. God's love for you will not change dependent on what you can do for God or not. We talked about this last week. It's not like it's a free gift with but you got to actually pay something for that free gift. It's not like you receive the free gift of God, the salvation, and then you got to follow these rules, otherwise you're going to lose it. It doesn't work like that. You can go on doing whatever it is that you're doing that hurts you or breaks your relationship with God for the rest of your life. You can keep doing it. And it will still not change your right standing with God. Is that amazing grace? That is amazing. That's good news. We need to know that. But then there's this tension, right? Because we think that Jesus just was like this grace giver sometimes. Like, do whatever you want, and your flaws, they're all good. It's all good. You can have them too. And we can think, hey, I can continue to do this behavior. It's under grace. And that's true, right? But then there's this tension. If behavior is not a factor, why should I care about maturity in Christ? And here comes that mind-bending, sometimes unfair, confusing, hard to grapple with tension. It's this, that Jesus came full of both grace and truth. Not sometimes truth and sometimes grace, not half and half, but full of both of them. And some of us really like the grace part, right? I love God's grace, and it's covered me, and I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. I don't care about the truth of my situation. Some of us labor under the truth of God and don't understand the grace of God. And it's like, man, I feel like I could never earn God. Or maybe you had a truth kind of parent. Imagine back to your parent when you were a kid. Was your parent a grace kind of parent? They're like, you can do whatever you want. I trust you, little teenager. What a joke, right? Or did you have a truth-telling parent where it's like, hey, if you break one of my rules, it's on. Don't, you better not. I mean, we need to learn how to live in this tension of truth and grace, because God says this, I totally accept you as you are, even if you never change. But if you let me, I will teach you the truth. I will show you what's real, and I will show you how to be free. But I won't force myself upon you. Are we able to say the same thing to other people? Are you able to say the same thing to other people? I'll never forget my buddy for a couple years. We called him Homeless Paul. That was him. and I loved Homeless Paul, and I met with Paul regularly at Jack in the Box. I'd buy him breakfast. We'd talk about God, and he actually loved God. And I'll never forget there'd be these moments where one time he had a knee that was like this big because he was drunk and tripped and sprained his knee, and so he's walking around on crutches for like months. I'll never forget another time he was like beat to a pulp. He got beat up one night, and then I'll never forget, there'd be times where he'd be just like MIA for periods of time because he was out binging, right? But I would tell Paul, we would talk about, God's word, and I helped him get into a rehab at one point. This sweet one up in the woods, up in the mountains. I wanted him to get his life right? But he knew, and I told him that, Paul, I don't care what happens. I don't care how beat up you get. I don't care if you ever change. Bro, I love you no matter what. You know in me you have a friend no matter what. Are we able to live this tension of complete acceptance, but at the same time calling what's real, real? A good therapist does this, right? Completes this environment that's completely safe, but at the same time just like cuts right to the heart. And it's just like, that's so painful. And that hurts a little bit. And it's so good and so true. And I feel like I'm healing. And I feel like my life is getting like revived back to life. I feel like you just punched me in the face, and it's exactly what I needed. It's this tension of truth and grace. There's Jesus broke a lot of rules, the rules that people created. But there was one time where he's breaking the Sabbath rules, and he's breaking the fasting rules, and he's breaking the who you can hang out with rules. And so these people come and question him, and he responds with this parable to address this concern. He says this, no one puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the wine will burst the skins, and the wine is destroyed. And so are the skins. But new wine is for new wineskins. Now, this concept would have been very familiar with people that drank wine out of wineskins. It's essentially this. When you put new wine into a new wineskin, it stretches that wineskin. But if you put new wine into an already stretched wineskin, it can't stretch anymore. And so it bursts. And so the wine is lost. And so these people are trying to keep their old ways and trying to figure out how Jesus fits into their old ways. And Jesus is using this simple analogy, illustration, parable, whatever you want to call it, to prove this point. Look, if you want me, I'm going to stretch you. And it's going to stretch you beyond what you can handle. And if you try and hold on to your old ways and bring me into that, you're gonna feel like you're gonna burst. If you want me, you have to let go of some of your old ways of doing things. So you see, Jesus is ushering in a completely new way of life. And he's gonna stretch us. It's a little bit like this balloon. You know, some of us are really good at pointing out the flaws in other people. And Jesus is challenging us to say, hey, if you really want to be people that are like me, full of grace and truth, you can't be legalistic as well. And that may stretch you. Some of us are really good at truth telling. And God may be wanting to challenge you, to stretch you, to say, can you be patient and accepting like I am? And yes, when the time is right and when the soil is ripe, absolutely. Can you, if that's going to stretch you a little bit. Maybe you're a grace giver and everything's all good all the time. And sometimes everything's not all good all the time. And maybe you're feeling like God is challenging you to call what's real sometimes. To bring stuff up. That's going to probably stretch you. In a few days, the neighborhood from Hillcrest all the way to Kensington, all the way down to South Park, about 40,000 people are going to get an invitation in the mail from this church for our new series called Reset. And we're trying to tackle difficult questions. Why do bad things happen to good people? We expect new people to come. Are you okay with new people coming to this church? That may stretch us a little bit. And how do you feel about that? How do you feel about people coming into this place that may not look like you or may not act like you? That may be difficult. That may stretch us a little bit. And maybe God he might just be asking you to, hey, go up to someone new and let them know that they're loved and accepted in this place. Maybe you've never done that before. That may cause some stretching in your heart. Maybe you want to even take that a step further and maybe even like get to know them and maybe create space in your life to become friends with someone new. Take them out to coffee. That may stretch you. Sometimes it can feel like, God, if you ask me to do one more thing, I'm going to explode. Stop. And God is saying, we're just getting started. But let me tell you, you can't, in order for these new things to happen, you're going to have to trade in your old ways for some new ways. I'm going to need to give you my heart for your heart, my perspective for your perspective. And are you willing to let Jesus pour some new wine into your heart? First, we may need to let go of some old things for God to do that. I put on the next step in the connection card, if you want to take the next step, begin to pray for someone that you can invite to this new series. It's not starting next week, it's starting the week after. Begin to seriously pray for someone that you can invite. Let's bow our heads and pray.